What's going on, guys? It's Nathan from Tattooing 101, and one of the biggest, things that or requests that we get from me and Brandon is that people just kind of want us to, check out their work and tell them that it's like it was good or not, or just give them some feedback and stuff like that. So I just thought it'd be cool to make like a little bit of a video to show you, like if you're not in the mastermind group already, and you're not really sure what to look for, like if you can see something's off in your tattoos, but you're not really sure about it and you kind of just want to know if if there's something wrong, or if there is something wrong, how to fix it, all that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to show you like the main things that I look for, typically what causes those issues that come up, and how to fix them, right? So this is one of our students in the mastermind group, Julie Candice, does some really nice realism stuff. So in terms of like critiquing a bunch of stuff, there's not a whole lot to say in the most recent tattoos because she's come a really, really long way. So we're going to go way, way back to some of the earlier stuff, and I'll kind of give you a bit of a rundown.
Practice.
On just sort of the first few tattoos that she did. Cool. So starting with this one, this was her second tattoo that she ever did back in June. Okay. So yeah, the first thing I'm going to look at, right, when I'm looking at a tattoo is it's going to be the line work, okay? I want to see that the line work is nice and clean, like it's not all squiggly and stuff like that or blown out, right? What that is usually is a stability issue, okay? When you first start tattooing, you're very uncomfortable with the machine, you're kind of like all over the place and stuff like that. You see a lot of people like kind of just tattooing with their wrist, kind of like just hovering above the skin and like they're just shaking a whole bunch. That's what's going to cause that shakiness in your lines. You just got no stability, and it's you're just very wobbly, right? Also, that leads to blowouts, like you're constantly going up and down, like with the depth. And then some areas are too deep, some areas are like kind of saturated. Some areas are like they're not deep enough, so they're quite opaque. You can see that the line isn't fully saturated, or they're just so deep that it's like blown out the skin and everything in between, right? So the way that you fix that is when you're tattooing, right? If you just use these two fingers as like a guard when I'm tattooing, I'll slide my hand across the skin, okay? By sliding my hand across the skin, I don't have to worry about my depth because I'm just holding my machine, I'm just gliding across. It's like the guard on a pair of clippers, right? It just makes the depth super consistent. Okay, and that's going to fix a lot of your line work issues when you do that. Also, the stretch is super important too. A lot of people just do like a 2-point stretch and then like tattoo it. That works for like small stuff, but you really want to have at least a 3 or even a 4-point stretch. So if you just put your stretching hand down, pull back, and then stretch like that, you've got a nice little area that's super, super tight. And if you're tattooing someone that's maybe on a little bit of a heavier side, that's got really, really stretchy skin, you can put your tattooing there, pull back. So you can put your tattooing hand down, pull back, and then tattoo. And you've got a really nice taut area of skin to tattoo just in the middle there. Don't overdo it. You don't have to like rip the skin apart. You've just got to make sure that it's got a little bit of tension on it, and those lines will go on really, really nice. Okay. The second thing I look for is, are the lines saturated or are they opaque? Okay. If they're nice and clean, they're straight, I want to make sure that they're saturated, right? And that means like black lines. Okay, sometimes if you do a line and you don't stretch the skin enough, the needle just bounces off the skin and it doesn't pack the ink in to get you that nice clean black line, right? And another thing, usually what causes that is either the hand speed and the voltage are not in alignment, like either you're moving too quickly and your volts are too low, so you can't, the needle's not hitting the skin enough times. Also, it can be an angle issue as well. If you're tattooing directly down like this, which you kind of have to do with like really large needle groupings, like 14s and above, because there's so many sharps in the grouping. If they're not directly kind of going down to the skin, or at least at like a tiny little bit of an angle, not all those sharps are going to penetrate the skin, right? But when you start using anything below that, you generally want to have like 45 to a 65 degree angle, and the needle goes across the skin as opposed to straight down, and it stacks on top of each other, and that's what makes the line a lot darker. Okay, all those little the lines going across the skin are overlapped, and that's what gives it that really dark, saturated, solid line. Also, the depth, again, using your your fingers as like a guard or a pair of clippers, that's what's going to make it really easy for you to regulate your depth. Okay. The next thing I look at is, are the edges of the lines tapered? All right. So you can see here in this one, some of them are and some of them kind of aren't. Like they've got like a really thick sort of point at the very end. If you don't tape your lines out at the beginning, at the end, and you have to join it with another line, it's really obvious that it wasn't done in one pass. Sometimes it just doesn't look that clean. Okay. A lot of that you can hide with shading, but a lot of it you can't as well. So especially if you're doing like a face or something like that, where there's not a whole lot of really dark tones, depending on the light source, then yeah, you really got to be careful that having that tapered in and out motion, that just makes your lines a whole lot easier to join. It's going to make your line work look a lot cleaner overall. Another thing too I'll even do is if you're really struggling to get your lines in, what kind of machine are you using, right? These entry-level machines like in the Dragonhawks and stuff like that, they're great for really small needle groupings. You don't need a powerful motor to push those into the skin. But once you start using thicker liners like, 9s, 11s, 14s, 18s and above, you really want a machine that's got a bit of a punch to it, right? You want like a 4mm stroke or above. I think Dragonhawk's got like a Master Fold. Yeah, the Master Fold Pro for Dragonhawk's got like an adjustable stroke. That's a great place to start if you're just getting into it. But then, as you get better and better and more confident, there's other machines you can upgrade to that, again, just make tattooing a little bit more easier. So you're having a long stroke makes line work easier. You can float the needle out a lot more and you'll have a lot more visibility. You won't just get like a bunch of ink dumping when you're tattooing and it completely obscures the stencil. When you float your needle out and you combine it with gliding your hand across the skin, it makes it easier to control the depth and you get tons of visibility for when you're doing because the ink's not dumping all of the stencil when you do your line work. Another thing would be is if your lines are, I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, another thing I remembered, using 12 gauge needles for solid line work. If you're doing really bold tattoos, really bold thick line work, you want to be using 12 gauge needles just because they're going to be a lot easier to saturate the skin in a nice dark line. However, if you're doing like fine line stuff, you actually do want thinner needles, like 10 gauges. They won't put as much ink into the skin, but they're a lot more precise, especially if you get like a long taper on them or something like that. And it's just a lot easier to see what you're doing. They don't put a whole lot of ink into the skin, so they've got a lot more precision with something like that. So that's the first thing I look at is the line work, right? But the next thing I'll look at is, does it have enough black? Because without enough black, a tattoo is just not going to age that well, right? You'll experience this a lot when you start tattooing a shop, and then people will come in, they want like these watercolor tattoos. They've got super tan skin because they're always out in the sun or whatever, and they'll expect you to be able to do just like light pastel pinks and yellows and aqua colors and stuff like that. And you can do those colors, but you need black to hold it in and give it contrast, because otherwise, they get sunburned a couple of times and it just fades like a ton. So, does the tattoo have enough black? This piece is pretty good. It's got that nice big black spot in the pupil. The lines are nice and saturated. Gives it enough contrast and makes that bright blue look really nice. The skin breaks are a nice touch too. I really like having skin breaks in if I'm doing anything stylized like neotrad trad, because first of all, skin tone doesn't fade, and it doesn't cause any trauma to the skin to have it there, right? If you're fully saturated with pigment, then you've got to cause a lot more trauma to the skin, which can hack it up a bit more, to take longer to heal. There's more risk in doing those like larger saturations, and it takes a lot longer too. That's kind of why I like doing trad tattoos, is they're super quick. You can knock a piece out like this in an hour and a half. So does it have enough black? That's the first thing. And then the next thing is, if it's a color piece, I'm looking at, is the color overworked, right? Because that's a huge problem with color. Okay, and most people struggle with this in the beginning is color packing, and they kind of overdo it a bit, right? Especially in the lighter colors like the pastel blues and stuff like that. As soon as you tattoo it, the blood's going to start to come up, and you can't really tell if it's in or not. Okay, so you kind of just have to know from experience. It's like, I know that the way that I packed that was consistent. It's going to be fine. And then, when the tattoo settles in like 15 minutes, you take a look at it. It's surprise, it's in that. But yeah, a lot of this comes from the technique used to pack, right? When you first start tattooing, or one of the the first methods that at least I was taught when I started tattooing was just like to do really really tight ovals. You have your needles at a little bit of an angle so that they never line up, no matter which direction that you're going, and this works really good for like small detailed areas, but it causes a lot of trauma. Okay, because you really viciously going over that like a very small amount of skin with a lot of needles. The bigger the needle that you're using, the more trauma it's going to cause, right? So yeah, that works really good for filling small areas. That's something that I do like with a round shader, filling in this part of the eye here. But when you're doing like bigger areas that are much wider, then there's not just one way to do it, right? The way that Brandon sees in a lot of his color tattoos is he'll kind of just do almost like pendulum shading, do really long, massive strokes, and then he'll cross hatch it. And then that's really good for, first of all, it gets really good saturation. You can switch the needles, the positions of the needles. It covers up all the needle marks, and that's how you get that smooth, those really solid fills, right? And it also causes the least amount of trauma because if you just kind of go back and forth in the same spot, the needles are hitting the same spots over and over again. But when you cross hatch, they're completely different spots that the needle is hitting, and it's just filling in all those gaps. So it gets you really good saturation with the least amount of trauma to the skin. Okay? So yeah, really, really useful technique. Cross-hatching, it's not just for black and grey, it works really, really well for colour too. So yeah, don't think that you have to do like those circular motions to cover the whole tattoo. Like using that pendulum shading method with colour, kind of going a little bit slower than cross-hatching it, makes it look really, really nice as well. So, next thing would be in the color. Yeah, how to tell if it's like overworked. Okay, this is another question that comes up a ton as well. It's like, what are you looking for if something's overworked? First of all, if their arm's on the floor and you've completely severed their limb, then yeah, it's overworked. Nah, but seriously, yeah. So if it looks wet and kind of shiny and like it's got like a lot of texture in the skin, that's a sign that it's overworked. Okay, you want it to look nice and matte, like not glossy by the end of the tattoo. That means that the skin's like you haven't messed it up or nothing. Okay, if you can see like that top layer of the skin kind of peeling off and you can see like it's constantly sort of bleeding, then yeah, it's typically overworked. Now there's different levels when it comes to overworking a tattoo. That you can overwork it a little bit or you can overwork it a lot, which can cause like scarring and stuff like that. Overworking a little bit, it's not the end of the world. Just leave it alone, let it heal, get them to come back and go over it again. And a lot of the time it can turn out just fine. That's a reason why we always recommend as well when you're starting out, tattoo the same people over and over again, because if when they come back and you're seeing them, how your old tattoo is healed on them, it tells you it's just like, oh, half my tattoo fell out. I need to go a little bit deeper to hit that second layer of the skin. Or maybe if there's like chunks of the tattoo missing, typically that's from overworking like in the same spots. It'll come out in like little chunks. So yeah, it'll come out like in little spots. So next thing is, so yeah, it's color overworked. Next thing is the photo itself, right? When you're putting your portfolio together and stuff, if it doesn't look like it was done in a professional setting, a tattoo artist sees them, they're just going to switch off. Like they're just not going to give you the time of day, right? It's going to be really hard to get into a shop. When you take photos of your tattoos, first of all, use a polarizing filter. You can get them off Amazon. They're super cheap. Just cuts out that shiny kind of glare on your tattoos, that really white shine. Okay, that's why tattoos always tend to look better in person than they do in photographs, because they don't use a polarizing filter when they take a photo of them, right? The next thing is, you just want the photo up against like a nice plain background, like a blank wall, or like black out the background like it's been done here. You don't want to be able to see like carpet and like clothes on the floor, or like your kids' toys or whatever littered in like the background, or the kitchen or whatever. It just doesn't look professional, and it's not gonna look good in your great portfolio. It's not gonna help you get into a studio, and it's not gonna help you get clients either. Okay, at least not the clients that you want. So yeah, there's the photo. And then also, like, I should have said this first, but hygiene, okay? So many I see a lot of people that are learning how to tattoo and they're learning really, really quick, but it's almost like they just ignore all hygiene, right? So you see it so often. Someone will tattoo, like they'll have their watch on, like with their gloves over it, okay? Or they won't take off their rings off their finger when they put their gloves over their rings. Tattooing on unwrapped surfaces and stuff like that. Um, if they're touching the client, any time that you touch the client, even if it's just putting the stencil on, right? When you shave the skin, it causes micro cuts in the skin. You can actually, they can spread bloodborne pathogens from just those tiny little microscopic cuts you got in the skin. That's why when you after you shave or whatever, and then you put like aftershave oil or alcohol, it stings because it's like actual cuts in your skin. Okay, so yeah, be super mindful of that. Don't touch the client ever with it unless you've got like gloves on. And another thing too, you'll see people that they'll like tattoo a forearm or something like that, and then they're holding the wrist like this to hold the wrist in the right position to get the photo with it, not realizing that they haven't got a glove on and their thumb's like super close to the tattoo. Yeah, it's super bad look. I definitely don't want to be doing that. And tattooing on unwrapped surfaces. Sometimes people will have an armrest wrapped for an entire tattoo, but then for the photo, they'll take off the wrapping and stuff like that. And it will, even though you did tattoo the piece with the wrapping on the armrest, no one's going to know that. They're just going to see the photo that you post online. It's like, oh, there's a fresh tattoo on an unwrapped armrest. I'm like, oh, okay, that person doesn't care about hygiene or whatever. So yeah, hygiene's super important. Okay, always go that extra mile. Pretend that everything has aids on it. Everything that gets touched should get thrown out. Everything should be wrapped. And yeah, you're just going to have a much better time. When it comes to like black and grey stuff, so we'll take a look at some of her black and grey realism. See, this stuff's cool. Sweet. So when I'm looking at like black and grey realism, the first thing, or one of the biggest things, obviously, that I want to look at is, are there any lines? Okay. In realism, there aren't like solid black lines. Okay, you don't want to include them. At least like, there are some styles that are kind of a little bit more, they're almost like pop art. They've got like a thick line around the outer edge of like the realism piece. Unless you're intending to do that, like just avoid line work in your realism tattoos at all completely. Okay, at least not black saturated line work. However, when it comes to doing like edges, like you see this neck, and you've got like a lot of darkness on one side, and on the side it's like pretty light. It's like a very well defined edge. Okay, you can still use a line and needle, right? But instead of like just getting your black and then like blasting that line in like you would with a traditional or a neotrad piece, you want to get like a medium or a dark wash and just brush that line in, okay? Almost like sketching it in. And that's what's going to build up that defined edge. And when you put the blacks in next to it, that line is going to like disappear and you're just going to have real clean edges on your realism. And it's going to look really, really nice. Again, want to make sure there's lots of black in it. Okay, we've got some really nice dark tones on the side here. Great contrast with the skin tone. The skin tone is not going to fade. The black's not going to fade. And yeah, overall, super, super nice piece. Another thing, if I see that the tattoo is like really choppy and not smooth, a lot of the time that's from, instead of doing like that pendulum motion, I can't remember if I already mentioned this, but yeah, when people do like pendulum shading with like black and grey, a lot of the time they'll just move the needles back and forth. And that's why you'll get like those really hard edges on like each end of the stroke that you put in with the machine. So that's, that'll definitely mess up your shading real quick. I always ask like, what materials did you use? Okay. Typically, if something like this, it looks like it was stippled in. So it's probably done with like a 3-round line, like a 10 gauge 3 or a 12 gauge 3 or something like that. That's fine. You can definitely do realism that way. It does take a little bit longer, but if you do it right, it looks really, really nice. But at the very least, if you're going to use mags, you want to be using 10 gauge mags to do the bulk of your shading. If you've got to do areas of solid black, it makes sense using like a 12 gauge for that. But for all of your soft, shading and bits where they're just like saturated bits of, like medium or dark wash or whatever, 10 gauge needles are what you want. Okay, they put much smaller holes in the skin. You get a lot more passes and a lot more chances to make it nice and smooth, which you really want to do with black and grey. Also, the machine stroke. Again, I can't remember if I mentioned this, but yeah, when you're doing line work, 4mm stroke machines, they've got a lot more power. It's going to make it easier for you. 3.5mm stroke machines, great for realism stuff. It's a lot softer hit, and it's not going to hack up the skin as quick. You get a lot more passes over the skin, and yeah, you can make it look really, really nice and smooth. I don't like to go lower than a 3mm stroke machine. Any lower than a 3mm, and you tend to have issues with, like, because the needle's just only moving such a small amount each cycle, you know, depth can be a bit of an issue. Sometimes you only get like that top layer of the skin. If you hit the top layer of the skin, it's going to fall out when it heals. You need to be hitting that second layer of the skin. Okay, and I would much rather, sometimes people use like a really dark wash and then they'll go really, really light on that top layer of skin to get the tone. I would much rather use a lighter wash and then go deep all the way to that second layer and get that in, because I know that's going to stay there. Okay. But yeah, again, when you're tattooing the same people over and over again, you see your stuff come back healed. If you see a lot of your realism stuff starting to fade and drop out, generally it's a depth issue. You're not quite going as deep as you need to. If it's missing like chunks here and there, that's like overworking and stuff like that, and it's pretty typical for that. But that's pretty much it, guys. When I'm critiquing a tattoo, those are the main things that I look for. If it's stylized, I look at the line work, then the black, then the color or the shading. And you know, if it's black and gray realism, I just want to make sure there's no lines in it. The shading's nice and smooth, which comes down to, you know, a combination of the right technique when you're doing your pendulum shading, and also, you know, you're making sure that you're using like the right stroker machine, the right gauge and needles and stuff like that. But yeah, as always, any questions, guys, just reply to this email. Happy to help you guys out. Have a Merry Christmas. You know, don't go too wild. Don't, you know, don't do anything I wouldn't do. And yeah, just enjoy yourselves. Have a happy holiday. Stay safe. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you guys all succeed as tattoo artists and absolutely crush it in the new year. And I'll see you guys in the next video.